All right, yeah! Thank God for fantasy football. I'm Buster Brown, and the show is called Redemption Rehab. Today, we're talking about the weekly waiver wire report heading into week 3 of the NFL season. Starting with this guy, Quentin Johnston of the Los Angeles Chargers. He's owned in 10% of the league, so he's out there on your waiver wire. He's a wide receiver. Last week against the Carolina Panthers, he caught 5 passes for 51 yards and 2 touchdowns. I have to be careful with this guy, though. Justin Herbert's his quarterback. He's got an ankle issue. Might not play this week. Who else do we like this week? How about these 2 tight ends? Hunter Henry of the New England Patriots. He's owned in 20% of all fantasy football leagues. We told you about him last week. We told you about Quentin Johnston last week. Hunter Henry went out and had 8 catches for 109 yards on 12 targets versus the Seattle Seahawks. Who else do we like at tight end? How about Mike Gesicki for the Bengals? He's owned in 5% of fantasy football leagues. He went out against the Kansas City Chiefs last week and had 7 catches for 91 yards on 9 targets. These are guys I'd be picking up right now, and I'd be consider putting them in my lineup. But the hot commodity this week that everybody's talking about is Isaiah Pacheco's looking like he might miss some time. So who's the handcuff to Isaiah Pacheco down in Kansas City? Well, these are your candidates. First candidate is Samaje Perine. He started the year in Denver. Now he's down there in Kansas City. He's probably the guy with the most seniority, so he'll probably get the start this week. But you got to keep an eye out for Carson Steele. He's an undrafted free agent rookie. He signed with Kansas City and was a training camp standout. And we can't forget about Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He's on IR. He's not scheduled to come back until week 5. Good luck in deciding which one of those guys to pick. It's going to cost you a decent amount of money to get them, and they might not even play well. Who else do we like at running back this week in case you have to replace someone like an Isaiah Pacheco and none of those guys are available? How about some of these guys? Braylon Allen. He's the handcuff down there in New York to Breece Hall. Last week he had 7 carries for 33 yards and a touchdown, rushing the ball, and he also can catch the ball. He caught 2 passes for 23 yards and another touchdown. Like I said, he's the handcuff to Breece Hall, but he may be able to help you in a pinch. Here are some other running backs we like. How about Antonio Gibson of the New England Patriots? He's owned in 30% of all fantasy football leagues, so he might not be on your waiver wire. He rushed the ball last week 11 times for 96 yards, and he caught a pass for 7 yards on 1 target versus the Seattle Seahawks. And he's the handcuff to Ramondre Stevenson. Other handcuffs we like, Ray Davis of the Buffalo Bills. He's the rookie out of Kentucky. Last week he had 9 carries for 29 yards and 1 reception. He's the handcuff to James Cook. We also like the handcuff to Aaron Jones. His name is Tyler Chandler out of Minnesota. He had 10 carries for 82 yards. Another guy you got to know about at running back is Deontay Foreman from Cleveland. He had 14 carries for 42 yards with 1 reception for 9 yards. He's the handcuff to Jerome Ford. Guys I'd keep on my radar, find out if Clyde Edwards-Helaire for the Kansas City Chiefs is healthy when he comes back in week 5. I'd want to know what's going on down there in Houston with Dameon Pierce. He's the handcuff to Joe Mixon. He's had a hamstring issue and hasn't played the first 2 weeks of the season. And the Dallas Cowboys added Dalvin Cook to their practice squad a couple of weeks ago. I'd want to know what's going on there in Dallas because their running game is terrible. Who else do we like? How about some of these wide receivers? Speaking of Dallas, how about Jalen Tolbert? He's only owned in 5% of fantasy football leagues. He had 6 catches for 82 yards on 9 targets versus the Saints. He had a good training camp, and the Cowboys are high on Jalen Tolbert. How about Elijah Moore up there in Cleveland? He's only owned in 2% of fantasy football leagues. Against the Jacksonville Jaguars, he had 6 catches for 44 yards on 8 targets. Guys I'd have on my radar. How about Josh Downs in Indianapolis? He's got an ankle injury, so we don't know when he's coming back. But when he does, you might want to consider putting him on your roster. And how about Jalen Nailor, rookie up there in Minnesota? He caught 3 passes for 54 yards and a touchdown on 4 targets with the absence of the injured Jordan Addison. You got to keep your eye out for this guy. How about Noah Brown from Washington? Used to play for the Texans from Ohio State. He had 3 catches for 56 yards on 3 targets. And you can't forget about Andre Iosivas from the Bengals. He had 2 catches, and both were touchdowns against the Kansas City Chiefs. But when T. Higgins come back, is Andre Iosivas going to catch any balls? I tell you what, speaking of the Bengals, how about this guy? Their tight end, Mike Gesicki. He's only owned in 5% of fantasy football leagues. He had 7 catches for 91 yards on 9 targets versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Or how about Zach Ertz versus the Giants? He had 4 catches for 62 yards on 4 targets. Guys I'd still have on my radar, Colby Parkinson of the Rams, Tucker Kraft of the Green Bay Packers, Luke Schumacher of the Dallas Cowboys with the injury to Jake Ferguson, who may come back in week 3, and Jonnu Smith down there in Miami. Look, Skylar Thompson's the quarterback for Miami until Tua comes back, and they like to throw the ball to the tight end. Jonnu Smith, had 6 catches last week, so he might be a guy you might want to consider picking up. Speaking of the Dolphins, who's going to be their quarterback? Looks like it's going to be Skylar Thompson. They did pick up Tyler Huntley off the practice squad of the Baltimore Ravens. Other guys you might want to consider picking up? How about Geno Smith of the Seattle Seahawks? He's only owned in 25% of fantasy football leagues, and he plays the Dolphins. He was 33 of 44 last week for 312 yards and a touchdown with a quarterback rating of 103 versus the New England Patriots. He plays Miami this week. Should be a good game. If you need a quarterback, how about Sam Darnold, the Minnesota Vikings? He's only owned in 10% of the fantasy football leagues. He plays Houston. Last week, he was 17 of 27 for 268 yards and 2 touchdowns with 1 interception and a quarterback rate of 109 versus the San Francisco 49ers. And then there's Gardner Minshew of the Raiders. He's only owned in 5% of fantasy football leagues. He plays versus the Carolina Panthers, who benched their quarterback today. Last week, Gardner Minshew was 30 of 38 for 233 yards and a touchdown with 1 interception and a quarterback rate of 94.7. Other guys I would have on my radar, besides Skylar Thompson for Miami, Malik Willis of the Green Bay Packers, if Jordan Love is still hurt. Like I said, Andy Dalton, the Carolina Panthers, with the benching of Bryce Young, and Easton Stick may be the starting quarterback for the Los Angeles Chargers if Justin Herbert's ankle isn't healed by Sunday. If you need a good defense, everybody's going to go out and try to pick up the Raiders versus Carolina. Other defenses I like, Seattle versus Miami because of the quarterback situation. Green Bay against Tennessee because of the quarterback situation. And last week we told you to pick up the Colts. This week, the Colts are playing the Bears. If you need a good kicker, we suggest you go out and get yourself Jason Myers of the Seattle Seahawks. He was 3 of 3 last week. Or Daniel Carlson of the Raiders. He was 4 of 4 last week against the Baltimore Ravens. Okay, that's it for the Week 3 Weekly Waiver Wire Report. If you like what you saw, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I'm Buster Brown. The show is called Redemption Rehab. Good luck.